I'm Emma Enderby, Chief Curator at The Shed, and welcome to our series of talks that look to the legacy and the ideas of artist Howardena Pindell and her exhibition at The Shed, Rope, Fire, Water, curated by Adeze Wilford. We are so grateful to be able to be open and continue our work supporting artists at this time. Our mission at The Shed is to produce and welcome innovative art and ideas across all forms of creativity to build a shared understanding of our rapidly changing world and a more equitable society. I'd like to thank the Ford Foundation and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for their generous support of this exhibition and our public programs. I would also like to thank the Howard Gilman Foundation for providing the Zoom platform that we will all be using for this evening's conversation.
My name is Adeze Wilford, and I'm an assistant curator at The Shed and organizer of the exhibition Howardena Pindell, Rope, Fire, Water, now on view at The Shed through this spring. Over her nearly 60-year career, Howardena Pindell has been a trailblazing artist, curator, and activist. The exhibition features her well-known, richly textured abstract paintings that critically engage with the politics and social issues of her time, while also demonstrating the healing power of art. The exhibition is centered on Pindell's new film, Rope, Fire, Water, the artist's first video work in 25 years. The conversation is part of an ongoing series of programs that contextualize and celebrate the way that artists, curators, educators, policymakers, and so many more have felt the deep impact of Pindell's inspiring career. Experts from a wide range of fields come together to explore the intersections of art and policy, culture and community. Thank you again for joining us this evening, and if it's safe for you to do so, we invite you to attend Howardena Pindell Rope, Fire, Water in person at The Shed, open until the spring of 2021. Thank you, and I hope you enjoy the conversation.
Hi, good evening. It's nice to have you all here virtually in the space. Welcome and thank you for joining us. This series is a part of ongoing conversations that we will be having around the exhibition Howardena Pindell, Rope, Fire, Water, which we hope that you've either had the chance to see or will see soon. Please check our website for more information on other conversations and programs that are coming up soon. We'll spend the first portion of today's program talking with our panelists, and then we'll move on to questions from all of you. For your ease of reference for tonight, there is a little button at the bottom of your screen in the lower right corner for you to put any questions to the group in. And feel free to send them throughout the conversation. We'll compile them and get to as many as we can before the end of the program. We also have a cart service for online captioning during the conversation. Feel free to turn that on by clicking the captioning button in the lower banner of your screen. So let's start our conversation by introducing our speakers, and we're very excited to have you all. I'll read everyone's bios now. So joining us this evening is Ashley James. Ashley James joined the Solomon R. Guggenheim Museum in 2019 as Associate Curator, Contemporary Art. Prior to joining the Guggenheim, James served as Assistant Curator of Contemporary Art at the Brooklyn Museum, where she was lead curator for the museum's presentation of Sullivanation, Art in the Age of Black Power, 2018 to 2019, as well as where she organized Eric Mack, Let Me Walk Across the Room, and is co-curating the exhibition John Edmonds, A Sidelong Glance, which opened fairly recently. James also served as a Mellon Curatorial Fellow in the Drawings and Prints Department at the Museum of Modern Art, where her work focused on the groundbreaking retrospectives of Adrian Piper and Charles White. She's also held positions at the Studio Museum in Harlem and the Yale University Art Gallery. She's contributed to essays and research for books, magazines, and catalogs, including publications on Charles White, Palmer Hayden, and Howardena Pindell. James holds a BA from Columbia University and a PhD from Yale University in English Literature and African American Studies. Howardena Pindell was born in 1943, and she studied painting at Boston University and at Yale University. She then worked from 1967 to 1979 at the Museum of Modern Art as an exhibition assistant, an assistant curator in the Department of National and International Traveling Exhibitions, and finally as an associate curator and acting director in the Department of Prints and Illustrated Books. In 1979, she began teaching at State University of New York, Stony Brook, where she is now a distinguished professor. In her work, she employs lengthy metaphorical processes of destruction and reconstruction, addressing social issues of homelessness, AIDS, war, genocide, sexism, xenophobia, and apartheid. Howardena's work has been featured in many landmark museum exhibitions and is in the permanent collections of major international museums. Most recently, her work was the subject of a retrospective titled Howardena Pindell, What Remains to be Seen, and is currently the subject of the exhibition Rope, Fire, Water at the Shed, with several new commissions, including the central video work, which gives the exhibition its title. So I'm incredibly grateful to have both of you here in conversation with us this evening. And so the first question I will ask Howardena, the centerpiece of Rope, Fire, Water is this new work that you've created. It's your first in 25 years. And it's an emotionally, politically intense work, tracking and at times visualizing the histories of racial violence in the United States, specifically lynching in the Reconstruction period. Can you talk about why this work was important for you to make and present now?
Excuse me. It is important now as we have just endured an authoritarian head of state. George Floyd's killing was the last straw. A huge diversity of peoples showed up to protest his death, including First Nation people. Our history of the abuse and killing of First Nation people has been hidden by the victors, the settlers who wrote the history. The media did not cover the First Nation protest of George Floyd. A friend, Athena Latoka, sent me a video of their protest. This exhibition could not be seen at a better time. More people of European descent are willing to hear about the true history of the country and ongoing abuse of people of color. We are also seeing the underbelly of the country float to the top under an increasingly authoritarian government. I am thrilled that Biden and Harris have won and that we will have a new government that will bring us back to our senses and will rejoin the world, as well as deal with intelligence, science, and facts about the COVID virus.
Thank you for that answer, Howardena. I'm wondering how this new video for you is connected to an interest in activism that includes both your art practice, but other aspects of your life. And I wanted you to talk about the multiplicity in your approach to activism. You've used your artwork as well as writing to speak to these issues that matter to you. So what are some of the methods that you find most impactful?
I find that the published word and film reach more people than paintings, even if they are issue related, unless they are in a public setting like a museum. In some cases, museums may own an issue related painting, but they may hang it only during a blue moon. At the moment, my video film, Free White and 21 and Rope, Fire, Water have reached more people than my writing or my paintings. The Shed exhibition gave me a wonderful opportunity to reach out to many people through film as well as the paintings.
Thank you. And as you know, so much of this past year, especially the past summer, has been centered around a newly awakened and large-scale activism. And you spoke about how the multicultural protests of the past summer especially have been a new and positive thing for you, and how you see that as a change to the activism of the 1960s. I'd like to know if you have advice for keeping motivated for a prolonged period of change. What are some of the things that keep you centered on your goals for a more just future?
I feel that the election of Biden and Harris is a huge step forward. Apparently, Trump is being told by some of his supporters not to concede. We have slid down into a muddy authoritarian swamp. I believe now they're trying to take it to the Supreme Court to overturn the election. The fact that we can engage in the world again in a positive manner gives me a great deal of hope, especially rejoining the Paris Peace Accord and the World Health Organization. We will no longer be out of the loop if a vaccine is discovered here or overseas. Something has changed since this earlier. There is a vaccine, but I'm waiting to see what the side effects are. We can share our knowledge. However, the fact that so many of our citizens are are attracted to an authoritarian form of government is alarming. It will keep us on our toes. I wonder what they will do to seek revenge following the lead of their authoritarian figurehead who refuses to concede. I will continue to do my work. I love doing research and I'm interested in the history of slavery going back eons, as there were Christian slaves, white Christian slaves. I wanted to find out about slavery in Europe. I know that the church had slaves and gave them to bishops as gifts. Leonardo da Vinci was the child of an enslaved woman in Italy of Arab heritage, according to Time magazine. The Vikings were very big slave traders and also enslaved their own people at home. One of their favorite destinations was the British Isles, other European countries, and would enslave them even for a crime or a debt. There were slave markets in Venice and slave markets in Florence.
Thank you to the Shed, Adeze, Justin, Solana, and everyone else for inviting me. And of course, Miss Howardena Pindell, I can't just say your first name, who I admire so much as an artist and researcher and activist. And it's such a pleasure to be here and to have been asked to contribute to the catalog, which was a really just once in a lifetime kind of opportunity for me. And kind of speaking of my admiration for you, which is largely in part to, or can be imparted to how consistent you've been over many years and how long you've been dedicated to both the practice and its intersections with an activist practice. And with that in mind, one of the things that I've known you spoke to Adeze with, especially when it came to this show, is this question of the kind of personal emotional toll that this kind of work takes on you over the course of decades. And even today I have on my mind Casey Goodson Jr., who was just killed in Ohio. And I also just want to call up Brandon Bernard, scheduled to be executed tonight in a federal execution by the state. So all of these kinds of injustices. And with this exhibition, you've spoken about how abstract painting has served in part as a kind of counterweight or salve for you. Could you talk a little bit about that function of abstraction, which often gets underwritten in kind of modernist histories of the function of abstraction is somehow separated from social reality? Could you talk about that?
Yeah, sure. My abstract painting at this point is about beauty, the soothing balm of seeing something beautiful and intricate. I need to create them to balance the sadness and the dread that the issue-related work uncovers. The Shed is the perfect place for the work to be seen, as it is a gigantic space and can exhibit a lot of large work and has a large area to show the film. After the car accident as a passenger in 1979 and the head and hip injury, I found that doing my work helped me to heal. My personality became a little cantankerous, which apparently is a side effect of a head injury. One also has memory and balance issues.
Thank you, Howardena, and thank you, Ashley. I really value you bringing up the issues that we're having even to this day. It's something that has been top of mind for me as we were putting together the list of names that are at the end of the film, that Howardena would send names over to me. And, you know, one of the conversations that we had was how we could, unfortunately, due to this country, continue to add names to that list even long after the exhibition is closed to the public, and what that means as a state our nation, what that kind of indicts to how we operate as a society. I want to continue on speaking about abstraction because I think it's such an important part of this exhibition. And I'd want to discuss abstraction as a medium for you historically, because it's been the site of occasional disagreement among Black artists in particular. And Howardena, I'd love for you to speak to some of the ways that you've encountered this throughout your long and storied career and what motivated you to keep working in this way.
I was not from New York, so there was some hostility from the African American community based on my being an outsider as well as an abstract artist. My work after graduate school gradually became abstract. I took my work to the director of the Studio Museum. He told me, and he told other abstract African American artists, to go downtown and show with the white boys. He said that as well to, as I previously mentioned, to other African American artists. To this day, he is still angry at me. He has no idea what my work is about now. I followed my own intuition, plus working during the day at the museum meant that I had very little daylight. I gradually moved to abstraction in the late 1960s and early 1970s. I followed my own intuitive path no matter what. It was a lonely way, but followed my own muse and not the threats and condemnation of others.
Hear on that. And you can see actually in this slide that's up right now that continuing that thread of your work with abstraction, you've made these new Black paintings, which themselves have roots in abstraction and conceptual art with an addition of these kind of textual and sculptural elements. How could you describe this new direction? And yes, here is one of them, Columbus. This new direction in your practice. What excites you about these new Black works?
I have used text in the past, but these two pieces, Columbus and the Four Little Girls, have more text than any of my past paintings. Another painting, also large, that I created before about Columbus, combined both beauty and horror. It is beautiful when you see it and horrible when you read it. As far as the two Black paintings, I felt a sense of urgency under our current leadership and did not want there to be an ambiguity. My earlier Columbus painting got me into a lot of trouble in the 1990s during my traveling exhibition. It was on view in Atlanta, and whites' reaction was that the show should be shut down because they said it was hostile to whites. They also complained, I believe, about the video Free White in 21. In Atlanta, there was a brief newspaper article about the protest in the Atlantic Journal Constitution. The exhibition was at Georgia State University. Around the same time, in a suburb near Atlanta, there was a play with homosexual themes. Whites asked that the money for the arts be given to the police department instead. In another venue for the show at an art school in Ohio, there was a hostile reaction to the show by white art students and possibly faculty. My Free White in 21 was stolen from the show the first week it opened. I received heckling calls at home from art students. The art school refused to follow up on the theft. The director of the gallery was threatened and his camera equipment was stolen.
Yeah, a very kind of hostile exhibition environment and space that I think, you know, obviously in this case, Adeze has done some great work to contextualize your work. And that's actually something that I really admire about the way that the show is actually laid out. It's among many things, and there was actually an earlier image that showed the kind of, yes, thank you, the floor print of the show, where the abstract paintings live alongside the video, which you walk into along that pathway and enter into that darkened space. So it becomes this kind of, you have the video, and then a kind of radial design where the abstract paintings form kind of these concentric circles around this centerpiece that is the rope, fire, water video. And I'm just curious, Adeze, if you could talk about your curatorial choices here, which seem so deliberate and so related to this question of abstraction versus the headiness that the video imparts.
Yes, and thank you for your kind words about the show's installation. One of the things that I felt was really important was to actually take a note from the way that Howardena actually uses her own practice. For me, I knew that the film was going to be this really fraught exchange of ideas for the public to encounter. And I wanted to be sensitive to that and sensitive to the location of the shed and the types of visitors that were coming in. Even before the pandemic occurred, the plan was always to have the exhibition open at the time a month before the presidential election. And that was a deliberate choice that Howardena had asked when we began having conversations about the show. And I knew that there were going to be a lot of tensions in the country, but also it was just going to be this emotional time for everyone. And so I really wanted there to be this balance between the more issues-based and thematic works and the abstract works, which, you know, are made to be intentionally beautiful and made to be this all-consuming, absorbing textural experience that you have in the space. And I wanted that balance to happen for the viewer, because I know that's how Howardena's practice works. So she'll be working and thinking and researching these issues-based paintings or projects like the film at the same time that she's working on these abstract canvases. And so I felt like it was a necessary step to have that in conversation together in the same room.
That's great. And I'm also curious about decisions you made around the inclusion of earlier works. There are some works that date back to the 70s. What was the kind of guiding ethos around the chronological framework, you know, considering what we've already said about how these ideas are at once current, but also kind of immemorial at the same time?
Yes, so I thought it was important to have works from the 70s in the exhibition for two reasons. I think one, so many of the works that are in the gallery are actually from the late 2010s, and you know, we commissioned 5 new paintings, and I thought that it was important to show the breadth of Howardena's practice, but also how those works interrelate with each other. So there's a wall in the show that is 3 works from the mid-70s, and at the very end is a work from 2015 that's in a very similar color palette, but the addition of these foam blocks and just texturally and in shape and form, it's just a radically different work. And I've been excited going through all of the paintings and researching for the show and seeing all of the different drawings that Howardena's done. Just the breadth and variance in her practice has always been something that I've been incredibly intrigued by, and I wanted to show that in the exhibition. And I also, just in a more sentimental way, one of the first encounters that I had with Howardena's paintings were these large-scale white paintings from the 70s, and I felt a really strong connection to them, you know, as a young art historical student, and I wanted to have that in the show as well. I want to shift us a little bit. If we can go to the next slide that has the spread from the publication in it. Thank you. I'm incredibly excited about this exhibition and that it's up for as long as it will be. But one thing that is important as a curator and as an art historian is the legacy of a publication, which we are in the process of printing, and it'll be stateside very soon. And it was important for me to have something that lived on after the exhibition. And I'm thrilled that Ashley's here joining us in conversation because she contributed to the text, and it's a really wonderful interview. And Howardena, because of the conversation that you had, I wanted to ask this question. It was important for me to have the two of you in conversation because both of you are actually the first Black women who are full-time curators at important institutions, both in New York City, but also internationally. And I want to know how you feel the industry has changed since your time at MoMA, and what have been some of the markers of progress for you?
The largest, actually recent pioneer for change is Ann Timpkin, chief curator at the Museum of Modern Art. She has installed Mel Edwards, an African-American sculptor, in the same gallery as Jackie Windsor, a white woman artist originally from Canada. Both African-American curators, two African-American curators, rather, curated my traveling exhibition along with my gallery, the Garth Gwennon Gallery. They produced a rather amazing catalog that won the George Whitton-Bourne Award for the Best Art Book of 2019. It was given by ARLIS, the Library Association. The curators' names were Naomi Beckwith, a Museum of Contemporary Art, Chicago, and Valerie Cassell Oliver of the Virginia Museum of Fine Art, Richmond, Virginia. I also want to mention Lowry Sims, who was a curator more or less during the same time I was, but she was at the Met.
Okay, did you want to expand any more on that question, or I can move on to asking Ashley a question?
Oh, sure, whatever, yeah. Why don't you move on to Ashley?
Okay, that sounds great.
Okay.
Ashley, I wanted to talk shop a little bit with you as well. And one of the questions that I had is, you know, as you've been building your curatorial practice, and several of the shows that you've organized have been championing early career artists, what has been a productive lens for you to building exhibitions and being an exhibition maker?
Yeah, thank you. I think that's an interesting question because the shows that I've done have happened in very specific kinds of ways, even if in hindsight, like a pattern emerges. With Eric Mack show, so I did Solvanation at the Brooklyn Museum, which was again a kind of opportunity of a lifetime. I have found that if my career is marked by anything, it's by these, I don't know, these like conspiracies of luck that allow me to be involved in really like top of my mind ever projects. I mean, Adrian Piper would be my #1 kind of solo exhibition artist alongside Howardena Pindell. And then I get to work on that show. And then shortly thereafter, I get to work on Solvanation that included her amongst so many others. And for Eric's show, this came about because I had an opportunity to curate a space around the same time, a slight overlap with Solvanation. And one of the main draws conceptually that I got from Solvanation was that I was really just interested in, especially if anyone saw that show on the second floor, it really comprised tons of kind of sculptural performance leaning painting, like what happens with performance what happens with painting in the aftermath of performance was kind of like the guiding question I had for that part of the exhibition. And Howardena Pindell's work certainly kind of brought that forward as well. So when I had this opportunity, Eric's work really came to mind as someone who was kind of taking those precepts of an expanded painted practice, but making it really fresh and contemporary and new. And his work with fabric sculptural practices became top of mind. And then there was a kind of architectural component that played off of the architecture of the museum. And then with John Edmonds, he was the winner of the inaugural WOVO Emerging Artist Prize. And in that case, he eventually, as part of that part of that show was able to work with our collections, our Brooklyn Museum's collection of African art, actually a body of work that the Ralph Ellison estate gave to the Brooklyn Museum some years back. So that shows up right now. And yeah, so in both cases, I mean, I look back on both of those and I think, oh, one's still up. They have this really strong art historical component that's baked into the concept. And I guess in some ways I am drawn to artists who are very kind of clearly working in certain kinds of art historical traditions, and doing something just really kind of conceptually fresh. I guess that is what draws me to any artist. And yeah, I think those were two early career artists working on other projects that incorporate mid and senior career, or whatever the words might be. But yeah, I do kind of see a conceptual thread when I think back to it as a whole.
You kind of touched on it a little bit when you were answering the question, but I'm curious about how the way your process was maybe formed or inspired through working at an encyclopedic institution, and how you kind of mentioned how it influenced John's practice, but I'm just curious about considerations you made towards placement of objects, especially I'm thinking about where the exhibition for Eric was located and situated, in the rooms that you had to walk through in order to get to that installation.
Yeah, that's a really great question. And I don't know how to answer it other than saying it's kind of like a chicken and egg thing, because I do feel like, is it once I have a project in mind, then I'm thinking about things like architecture, historical context, all of these things, and then that arises? Or is it the opposite, and I'm naturally kind of drawn to artists who are already like having those contextual questions at the top of mind? But I mean, in the case of John's show, which I co-curated with Drew Sawyer, curator of photography at the Brooklyn Museum, that actually was the historical angle was really a group think kind of scenario, where so many people at the institution had been thinking about A, the African collection, B, the Ralph Ellison collection in particular. So it was like this kismet where so many people were interested in bringing the contemporary and the historical together. And John was a kind of perfect gathering of those various desires and excitements over that.
Thank you. I'm going to shift back to Howardena really quickly. And I want to talk, we discussed your career as an artist and as a curator, and something that I think is really foundational to the work that you've done is your career as a professor. And I'd like to talk about some of the ways that you found your own artistic practice shifting over the years as you've spent time shaping this next generation of young artists.
Well, I'd like to answer about what it was like to work with the modern between the 60s and 70s. Then I'll answer the question about teaching.
Of course, please.
Okay, all righty. While I was working at the modern, this is in the 60s and 70s, I started in 67 and I left in 79. I quit. Anyway, it could be at times like walking into a brick wall. The white curators would pass through the brick wall by way of a revolving door. In a number of ways, it was impossible to get to the other side because of the social emissions. I felt pretty much alone. My boss was the type of person who made you sign up to go to the bathroom. She would promote me, but she herself was a brick wall. She would not invite me to her professional social gatherings, even if I was the associate curator, helping her with a major exhibition. She also refused to invite me to her museum-wide retirement party and even invited people who she had fired. They were all white. When I called to find out if I was invited, she told her secretary to tell me not even on the door list. The secretary that relayed the message was the same one who had who, when I borrowed her pen, wiped it off with a tissue. She did not want to touch it. She was from England. I was challenged about being invited. I challenged them about not being invited to the retirement party and was told by the museum director's assistant that it was a private institution and they could invite anyone they wanted. I spoke with an attorney and he said that MoMA was not a private club, it was a fiduciary trust holding the art in trust for the people. On the other side, when I would go to the restroom, the white women would grab their purses out of fear I would steal it. In terms of some of the flack I got from the outside, one particular African-American woman artist would heckle me, even call me at home, and warn me and blame me for the museum not collecting her work while I was employed there. A white woman artist would, in gatherings of AI Arts, a women's cooperative gallery, after I left, she would constantly at different gatherings say that I did not know I was Black. I have a list of things over the years, but that museum related and even quite recently, I will save for my memoir. One positive side was that I visited Anna Bendieta in her studio in the museum, on a day the museum called Gallery Day. As a result, we became friends. I visited one of her earthworks in progress in Iowa. I also met Laurie Sims, who was at the Metropolitan Museum. We traveled together for a month and a half to Africa, representing our two museums. I was sent to see art activities and also represented the Museum of Modern Art's library overseas program. My teaching is separate from my studio practice. At the same time, one informs the other. I teach figurative art basically to undergraduates. The graduate students' work covers a wide range of expression. They explore installation and digital art besides painting and sculpture. I am grateful to have a wide-ranging education I also learned from my students. I had a flip phone for 14 years. One of my undergraduate students used a smartphone to see the details on a copper vase with an inscribed design. The idea caught on. The paintings that used this method were exquisite. It's perfect also teaching online, although it takes a lot of time, as you get high definition images that you cannot get on Zoom. I call them and we discuss the work. I'm also thrilled that on the undergraduate level, my students are more diverse. They are Latino, African-American, Haitian, Asian, and white. Sadly, I have not had any First Nation students. I have taught at Stony Brook for about 42 years. Way back in the beginning, the students were mainly white working class and some were extremely hostile. I got the most hostility from the white women students who acted like there was nothing I knew that could teach them anything. I had an older white woman student from South Africa. After the accident, I could not stand for long periods of time. She asked me with great hostility why I had to sit down. The white male students would walk in with a kind of racist swagger, which basically said, we are white and male and we're in charge here. I could tell that the Black male students were afraid of them. Recently, I ran into this with one white female graduate student. We really, though, have a diverse body of undergraduate students. In general, the graduate students are, however, respectful. I have run into much worse in New York City.
Thank you, Howardena. I think the care and attention that you have for your students is really remarkable. And, you know, as we've been talking over the past several months, as you had to move onto a digital platform, your adaptability to that, I think it's it's a great one. And I'm sure they're very appreciative.
Thank you.
Ashley, I wanted to talk to you a bit about some of the upcoming projects that you're working on. there have been some exciting announcements, and I'd love for you to talk about some things that are coming up for you since we last spoke.
Yeah, thank you. Quickly before that, I just wanted to reiterate this point in case it got lost, because Miss Pindell is so modest about her curatorial career in particular. And I do think that I think that's a wonderful research project for a young art historian to take on in the future. But I do think that, and the catalog, I think, goes some ways in describing this, but your resume as it pertains to all that you did at MoMA is so vast. And I'm like looking at it right here, and I won't read everything, but I do think it's important that we recognize Ms. Pindell as the artist that she is, but also the curatorial practice is so clearly impactful. And when we had our interview, I asked, oh, well, what do you think kind of characterizes your approach to curating? And do you think in hindsight that, you see any kind of thread that carries through? And you said, that's a question for somebody else to answer. And so I want to pose that out to anyone watching, that is a question to be answered by a historian. And yeah, so for me, I was in drawings and prints, which at MoMA, which further connects me to Miss Pindell. And I realized that and I also have an English literature background. I have a very kind of textual mind. That's always been the way that I think. And I think I've learned to just go with it and see it through. So I am working on, well, 2 exhibitions next year at the Guggenheim. One has been announced already, and that's the Hugo Boss Prize, which I'm so excited to be co-curating with Catherine Brinson. And the winner this year is Dina Lawson, an artist who is both so formally and conceptually rigorous, but also just very much a humanitarian. And that, I guess I'll say, is a through line. I've never worked with artists who are mean people, but somehow see themselves connected to a social world that matters. And then my other project that I'm working on is a collection show, which I'm so excited that will be announced soon. I'll say one word about it, but it features artists who look to the document, which I just define as text-based document, and the photograph, thinking about the document as a both physical and metaphorical container of history. So artists who are intervening upon the document in some way as a way of speaking back to this history, surfacing unknown histories, or just taking up the question of record keeping and historicization itself. And so this is Sadie Barnett's My Father's FBI File, which is a great example of some of the work in that exhibition. And when I think about an artist like Sadie Barnett, who uses spray paint and glitter and kind of intervenes upon the pristine space of, in this case, the paper document, but I'm also thinking about Howardena Pindell's work on the canvas, and that's certainly an artist who I see within her lineage as well. Thank you.
Thanks, Ashley. And before we open up to some questions from the audience this evening, I just wanted to thank you both for talking through all of these ideas this evening, and also for working with each other over the course of this past year for the publication. It's been a real delight to listen to you both talk about your practices, and it was a really important thing for me to have you both in conversation, especially given the state of the industry that we are working in, and having watched through Howardena's recollections of her time at MoMA. Both of us, Ashley and I, were actually at MoMA overlapping, and then to see Ashley go off into these other institutions, it was it was really important and urgent for me to have the two of you in conversation. So I so appreciate your time both this evening, but over many months and many conversations that we've had for the publication. So I just wanted to say that before I turn to the audience, and we do have quite a few questions this evening. So I'll ask a couple of them, and then we'll answer them as best as we can. So one of the questions is more about form, Howardena's, and it's about the way that the works, the canvases, are stitched together and pieced together. And this person wants to know what the significance behind the stitching is.
What's interesting, I always talk about how I have battle scars. Like I have a scar on my head, I call it my Harry Potter scar. I had a breast operation, so I have a scar, but I keloid. So the sewn surface actually looks like a keloid scar, the stitching. You know, if I didn't have keloiding, I would heal perfectly smoothly. So for me, it's also a kind of, oh, it's odd, like almost a reverse scarification, you know, where someone has welts. Well, actually, it's not in reverse. Welts where they've been cut to form various designs on the body. It's an African, but I don't know which particular nation in Africa that this is done. So I also enjoy sewing. When I was a child, my parents sent me to the Singer sewing machine classes for children. And granted, we were using a machine, but it introduced me to using thread. And also, when I started the museum, the first salary for the first year was $5,000 a year. And you were expected to attend the formal openings. So I had to make my own clothes. So I was stitching my own clothing. So it's both scarification in a way. It's from my real scars, and also the necessity of having to make my own clothes. It's likely that I used a machine for that, but it kept me engaged with the act of sewing. I also love the way it looks. So I read it more as beauty marks, like in scarification.
Thank you. And then this question is from an audience member who said that they had the opportunity of seeing the show before it officially opened. We did a members preview day, and she met this person. Sorry, I gendered them, but I don't actually know what their gender is. So this person mentioned that they were one of the few Black people in the space at the time, and spent quite a long time in the exhibition. And as she watched the film, they watched it more than once, but they noticed that they were the only Black person in the room, and that they were also the only one expressing emotion. And they had a very visceral response to the film. You know, it is an emotional work, and I think if you haven't seen it, it's worthwhile to spend time with it. I definitely have spent a lot of time in that room since we've opened. And one of the question that they have is, what is the response overall from attendees, and what did Howardena, you can answer this, but I'll also answer what
Okay.
I hoped people would take from seeing the film.
Well, I feel that there's so much history that's hidden. And lynching in particular, I think, has been brought up front. But it has to do, I think it was the Michigan governor, where some militiamen or vigilantes were going to try her for advocating wearing a mask. They were going to kill her. So in a sense, there was an attempted lynching of someone white. So even though lynching was considered something that would happen to African Americans or non-whites, when you look on the film, the statistics show, the numbers show that whites as well as blacks were lynched. I had like an emotional reaction to hearing about whites being lynched. I think partly because I don't know, it has to do with white supremacy and how white supremacy seems to want to protect whiteness. But if whiteness doesn't make them happy, in other words, if you don't do what you're expected to do, it's like a cult. White supremacy is like a cult. Then they can turn on you. It reminds me of a woman. She was somewhere, I don't know whether she was from Michigan, wherever, during the civil rights movement, wanted to come down and help with some of the protests about voting, whatever. And the white men shot her to death. They shot her in the face. So, in a sense, white supremacy is like its own cult, but if you're in the cult, you're safe. But for whites, if you're not in the cult, then you can be treated as badly as a person of color. I don't know if that answers the question.
I think it does. I'll answer from my perspective, from like an organizational standpoint. For me, I think, a lot of the conversation around the Shed exhibition has been around the timeliness of the body of work. And I think it's interesting because you have had this idea since the 1970s, and it's been something that is in a continuum of thought for you. And it's not something that, you just decided to put on view in reaction to the current administration. It's something that you've been thinking about and working through for a really long time. And for me, what I want audiences to take from this exhibition is an understanding of the legacy of hatred in this country and what it's done to populations, and to desire to not continue on in the way that we have in the past. And I know that's a very lofty, hopeful position to have, but I do believe in the power of art as a force of social change. And so that's what I would like for people to take away from the show, that art can be a place where you can learn the history of a nation, but also be enveloped in a really beautiful, aesthetically pleasing room full of paintings that are joyous, even though sometimes the subject of, I'm thinking about Plankton Lace 1 and 2, how they're very closely related to climate change, but they're still really beautiful works. And so that for me is what I hope audiences walk away with. And I think we have time for one more question. And this question is for Ashley. And someone asked, do you think you would have been drawn to Howardena's early work like you've been drawn to Eric and John's?
By early work, do you mean what are we talking about? Like straight out of grad school? out of Yale?
Let's situate it like early 70s, because that's a body of work that we're familiar with.
Yes, would and am. In fact, I think that earlier work is what I, like Adeze, first saw of Howardena Pindell's practice. I love minimalism and all of Howardena Pindell's experiments within the kind of constrictions of these muted palettes, her interventions on the surface of the canvas, all of that stuff. In many ways, what I've appreciated about Ms. Pindell's practice is the way that painting lives alongside what the subject of the show lives alongside this historically specific and really ethically driven research practice that also informs the work. And that has been there from the beginning in many ways too. And so the answer is definitely, it's a resounding yes. And it's been great to continuously see those earlier works in exhibition contexts like Soul of a Nation and the show, while also getting to understand a kind of longer trajectory of the practice. So yes.
Thank you. Okay, so we are coming up to time, and I am so appreciative of both of your time. I'm also appreciative of all of our participants. There were some really great questions. I have to close out by saying thank you to the Howard Gilman Foundation for providing the Zoom platform for tonight's conversation, as well as the Ford Foundation and the New York City Department of Cultural Affairs for their support of both the exhibition and our public programs. And we are continuing on with this series of conversations into the new year, so please be on the lookout for information about those upcoming programs from the Shed. It'll be posted on our website. You'll likely also get an email about things that are coming, and the book will be here soon, so please be ready for that once it arrives. I am so thankful for your time, and I really appreciate it. So have a good evening, everyone.